Welcome, everybody, for this fifth edition of the State of Culture webinars. For those of you who followed us in the previous editions, you will already know that since we published the State of Culture report in October last year, we've set out on a journey to discuss with our membership and the broader sector the findings of the State of Culture report, which is less a policy document, but more meant as a sort of mirror for our sectors to discuss prevalent issues that came to the fore through the research period of the report writing. We've kind of followed the chapters of the State of Culture report, and we see this series of online conversations also as a pathway to our annual conference Beyond that will take place in Torino this year from the 4th to the 7th of June, where we will meet and bring together these conversations in a physical setting, looking forward to the next State of Culture report. The previous webinars have been extremely lively and have brought an incredible amount of feedback and new ideas that we are collecting already. And I'm really happy to embark on the discussion on democracy today. And as with the previous webinars, also this one is chaired by board members of Culture Action Europe. I will hand over with great pleasure to both Stefan Gies from the AEC. I leave the complete title of the network to you, Stefan. I think no one can say it as eloquent as you. But the first word is to Liane Hoogwaarts from Kunsten 92 in the Netherlands, also Culture Action Europe member, board member. Please kick it off.
Thank you, Lars, for the introduction. It's up to me to just quickly start with some housekeeping, just a few technical things. I think you've all seen in your screens that this live stream is being also recorded. So just that you're all aware of that. Today we'll start with a short presentation that Stefan and I will give. And, you know, if you've got any questions, please place them in the chat, but we have reserved the majority of today to enter into discussion with you, at which point please either use the raised hand function or obviously the chat, and we'll keep an eye on that. Also, just to give you a heads up, when we finish presenting, we'll be using Zoom's whiteboard to gather some thoughts from you that might not fit into this short hour about some potential challenges, opportunities, and best case practices when it comes to cultural democracy. So maybe start thinking about what that could be and what you might want to share with us later on that whiteboard. So with those kind of housekeeping things finished, it's back to Stefan.
Yeah, welcome from my side as well. The purpose of this webinar is to gather feedback from you, from the Culture Action Europe community and beyond, on the State of Culture report, and to feed further action, especially, as Lars already mentioned, our discussions at the Beyond conference in June in Torino. Yeah.
So, I think one back.
Yeah, one back.
Too speedy.
Still one back.
Yeah. So we're here, you've all registered, so you probably are well aware that we're here today for the theme cultural democracy. And we thought we would just quickly start off with a definition of what we mean when we say cultural democracy, because I don't think everybody is on the same, well, just to make sure that we're all on the same page about it. So when we talk about cultural democracy in the report State of Culture, we refer to a policy concept that promotes active participation and recognition of diverse cultural practices, and fostering a relationship between institutions and communities that recognizes everyone's right to create culture. It shifts from a passive consumption to collective engagement. It values local knowledge, traditions, and voices while encouraging a dialogue between local and global cultural expressions. It's a very broad topic. I'm sure you'll also find if you've read the State of Culture report. So next slide, please, Karen. We have identified 4 sort of key areas within this, and during this presentation, we'll dive into 2 of those to kind of delve into them with a bit more detail. So we've identified combating disinformation and addressing social polarization, strengthening the capacity for dialogue and cohesion in a plural and diverse society, fostering civic engagement, democracy, and debate through participation, and ensuring, and now there's a chat in front of my screen, ensuring freedom of expression and critical thinking. So these are the 4 things, but yeah, like I said, we're going to focus on 2 of these. Stefan will explain a bit more about that.
So please go through one back, maybe. Yes. So what to be expected in the next 55 minutes? So as said, 2 inputs from first me and then Lian on 2 chosen topics out of those 4 you can see on the screen. And after each of those 2 topics, there will be the opportunity to ask comprehensive questions in the chat and the opportunity for an in-depth discussion of both inputs and even more if you want. That means also about the other 2 topics or more will be after Lian's presentation. So, Lian.
It's you for Stefan.
No, as for me, so the overarching key question standing behind all that is, what does it mean to make culture more democratic? So, and it's now I continue maybe with the topic which I have chosen to present is, as you can see here, highlighted fostering civic engagement, democracy, and debate through participation. You can see in the brief explanation that the State of Culture report makes explicit reference both to the Porto Santo Charter and to the term cultural citizenship, which is unfolded in the Charter. So the Porto Santo Charter, next slide please, is one of the key projects and key outcomes of the Portuguese presidency of the EU Council in the first half of 2021. The ambition standing behind this was to describe more precisely what contribution culture can make to implement the European Democracy Action Plan, which has been adopted by the European Commission just a month before the Portuguese presidency started. And that's why the key question addressed by the Charter was, how can culture strengthen democracy, and what does it mean for culture to be democratic? So right at the beginning of the text, the Porto Santo Charter states it is necessary to promote a conception of cultural citizenship based on pluralism, on the recognition of the multiplicity of voices, and on the valuing of differences. So this, maybe you can stop the screen sharing. This refers to a so-called traditional understanding of democratization of culture, the origins of which lie in the more than 100-year-old idea of the socialist working class culture movement, but which in the 1950s and 1960s were also promoted by more bourgeois conservative cultural politicians in many European countries, probably most known through the French Minister of Culture at the time, André Malraux. In the words of the Porto Santo Charter, this traditional understanding of democratization of culture is, now I quote, anchored on a top-down, albeit well-intentioned vision that there is only one monolithic culture. This paradigm, however, not only, and I quote again, ignores the individual's right to self-determination and the changeability of trends and conventions, it also devalues the people themselves, who are treated as consumers, treated as non-equal, excluded from the role of cultural agents. So the question is, what must a society do to empower each individual to determine and live their own culture? Or to put it in the words of the Charter, how can we give access to cultural participation and to cultural educational opportunities to as many people as possible? To answer this question, the Porto Santo Charter refers to the concept of cultural citizenship. The term cultural citizenship itself is not new. It has been used in the US since the 1980s, but the Porto Santo Charter reinterprets the term and thus makes it suitable to be applied in a European context in the 21st century. While the gap to be closed in the US understanding was first of all seen as the hierarchy gap between white Anglo-Americans and Latinos, which implied the assumption that the American dream can only come true for those who speak the right language, have the right color, the interpretation of the concept of cultural citizenship in the Porto Santo Charter is more open, more dynamic, and less normative. Above all, it emphasizes the role of educational and cultural institutions to empower each and every human being to find her and his own way and his and her own cultural belonging and own cultural identity. To quote once more the Charter, in order to promote cultural citizenship, we must place culture, understood in a plural and participatory manner, at the heart of educational policies, and at the same time, education at the heart of cultural policies. In order for each one to be able to participate in the culture of all people in an empowered manner, they must have the conditions to do so. The Porto Santo Charter ends with 38 recommendations, of which a first block is addressed to policymakers, a second one to cultural and educational institutions, and the third and final block is addressed to all people. It's worth having a closer look to it. You find it on the internet together with follow-ups and all these kind of things. I don't have the time to go more in detail here. So why is the Porto Santo Charter such an important point of reference for Culture Action Europe's State of Culture report? Instead of answering this question, let me conclude with two more quotes from the report. Democracy is not just about responding to invitations, it's about having the power to invite and to set the agenda. Democracy isn't only about contributing to your piece to the broader picture, but also about inventing and creating the picture itself. Cultural democracy is not about discarding the notion of artist as a profession or questioning the value of art education. Instead, it aims to make these fields more inclusive and pluralistic. I hope I was able to provide you with a little food for thoughts for the discussion later on. Thanks. Now I hand over to Liana.
Thank you. I think that sets us up quite nicely for maybe a bit more thinking from the policy to the practical. Karim, if you could get the presentation back up. Yes, I think so. From the four themes that we highlighted at the start, I thought I'd delve in a little bit to the idea of strengthening the capacity for dialogue and cohesion in a plural and diverse society, underpinning the notion that culture has the power to create community spirit while at the same time celebrating the richness of diversity. So before really getting into it, I wanted to start with reflecting the findings of the survey back to you, because I'm thinking that most of you probably filled in the survey that led to the report. So within this, you ranked promoting dialogue and pluralism of ideas and cultures, promoting freedom of expression and critical thinking, and fostering civic engagement as the three most important elements of culture's social role. And in fact, social polarization was identified as the most pressing challenge for the cultural sector in the next 5 years, surpassing climate change, conflicts and wars, and digital technologies. And I suspect that this is because without addressing polarization, I think the other challenges might just become impossible. Another reason I wanted to delve into this particular aspect of cultural democracy is it's a theme that we've been grappling with directly at Kunst 92, where I work as a policy advisor in the Netherlands. And we find ourselves more and more reiterating the need for culture to remain a space where plural and diverse voices are given a podium. And importantly, not just a place where we're not just able to be inspired by each other, but also where we can be free to disagree and learn from each other. And this capacity for dialogue is really under threat. So the state of culture doesn't just look at the cultural aspect of things; it also, to an extent, looks at the extent to which democracy itself is under threat, noting that political participation is increasingly becoming a matter of individual rather than collective action. So, and this is then what's on this slide, what has been leading to this, increasing individual space instead of collective action, instead of community. The report references Jonathan White, who states that since the mid-20th century, consumer culture has increasingly shaped people's outlook on life, and training them to envision the future in individualistic terms. And And these micro features, which he calls them, are focused on personal gains. So, for instance, promoting owning a car as the aesthetic of the modern, embodying a personal dream. And today, marketing algorithms further amplify this individualized consumption. He concludes that this is a story of social fragmentation, but at the same time of ever tighter personalization. So the next slide. It's something that comes up quite often, I think, in our webinars, but again, last week, for instance, at the Culture Campus webinar, we discussed the power of culture to create imagined futures. And in the same way, there are countless ways that culture brings to life the imagined we as a society. So you can think of festivals that bring together people beyond their predefined identities and points of belonging. Libraries help to engage in conversations around social justice, promoting open knowledge and open culture shared goods. The list goes on. I'm sure you'll all have countless examples. And so I know that I'm preaching to the converted, but I think it's important to also emphasize that, as we all know, culture plays a huge role in supporting democracy. As part of the work plan for culture in 2019-22, the European Commission undertook a study to analyze the links between culture and democracy, which brought significant evidence that participating in cultural activities boosts people's engagement in voting, volunteering, and other civic-minded activities. So culture is good for democracy, just to really emphasize that again. So to come back to this quote that Stefan also highlighted, I just think it's important to keep emphasizing it, is that democracy is not just about responding invitations, it's about having the power to invite. Although culture is fundamental to democracy, it must itself be democratic to fulfill this cultural role. And to really achieve this true cultural democracy, I think will really take a huge shift in how we approach things. I think there's many examples of how this can be done. The European Theatre Convention Casebook that I think was published just a few weeks ago, for instance, highlights all the things that you might need to take into consideration. You can think of translators, cultural intermediaries, but also a welcoming atmosphere, protected time, and a patient and open environment to make sure that voices are truly heard and included in programming and development of artistic practice. It also brings to mind, in my mind anyway, the Kai's Aleph Sina manifesto, which centers the importance of care, specifically nurturing communities of care. And I think there's a certain level of slowing down that is crucial to all of this. Some concrete examples that we might think of, there's Kai Theatre in Brussels, which has taken on the challenge of making its governance, management, and programming more democratic and representative of the communities in which it's embedded, under the motto "How to Be Many." And I highly recommend looking at their website of how they've approached this and embedded this. And then here in the Netherlands, maybe a more overarching level, we have something that's called the Diversity and Inclusion Code, which is a code of conduct born by the Dutch cultural creative sector, and which is committed to diversity and inclusion. It's an instrument of self-regulation that strives towards a cultural sector that is truly representative. The aim is a sector that is equally accessible to everyone, and I'm just quoting, to everyone from creators and producers to workers and audience members. The sector will only be owned by everyone when everyone can contribute in their own way, when everybody is valued, respected, and heard, and when everybody feels at home in the sector. It's essentially a tool that allows organizations to assess where they stand in this general theme, and it gives tips and advice on how and where they can improve. And in addition to that, they also provide training on various topics like co-creation, website accessibility, and they've also recently published a guide to inclusive and accessible language. So organizations that apply for subsidies, for instance, are required to describe how they apply and relate to the code, but at the same time, it's not policed. It's not something that's, it's not policed. It's a self-assessment tool to kind of collectively motivate the sector to work towards true access and participation. So maybe that's an interesting example of guidelines that can enable progress more broadly. I'm curious to hear what you all make of it. And that actually concludes my part. So I think we can stop sharing now. Thank you. That concludes my presentation. And before we open up the floor to questions and hopefully a lively discussion, I wanted to refer back to what I mentioned at the beginning, the whiteboard on Zoom. And there it is. And hopefully you can see us as well as the whiteboard, which is just loading on my screen in any case, where we invite you to share challenges, opportunities, and best case practices, which we might like to apply. And that can help Culture Action Europe build an archive of great examples and to help further the discussions at Beyond this summer. So while you're thinking about what to write, I'm curious to hear from you all what you, maybe to start off with the question, what you think, for instance, what frameworks might be needed at national or EU level to further cultural democracy, and what capacity building might be needed, and for whom. So I'm gonna look in the chat now and look over, see if I see any hands. Nothing. Oh, Willem.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I've been working as a market researcher in the Dutch cultural sector for many years, and I'm quite familiar also with the program that Lian just outsketched, the Culture and Diversity Code, which has been introduced for some years in the Netherlands. Since 10 years, I live in Germany, and also try to interest my German cultural institutions for a more data-based approach to the topic that we discussed today. Since what both speakers have addressed is, of course, of great value on a conceptual level, but in a day-to-day basis, cultural institutions have to start connecting to their environment, to their market, to their neighborhoods. And if you don't know where you're going, you're probably are going to end up somewhere else, as the famous Gabriel Peter has said in the 70s. And this is, I think, the main problem that we will face on a practical level if we want to make anything work towards the goals that you've just shed some light upon. So my pledge would be to not forget a kind of grassroots, bottom-up approach, which enables cultural institutions to start working on this cultural democracy on a day-to-day basis by setting up databases, by collecting data on the behavior of their audiences or on the non-visitors or non-participants. Because if you don't do that, you will always continue to work on in an international bubble in which, and now I'm putting it a little bit bluntly, you exchange words that fit probably very well into some international cultural bingo game by exchanging all these expensive concepts. But on the ground, boots on the ground kind of approach, to quote unquote a Dutch politician. That's something which will help to create some success, to create some progress also, because otherwise we will only be meeting in this digital environment, not really being able to connect to the people that we want to be part of this cultural democratic environment process.
Thank you, Willem. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's also why we're particularly keen to hear about best practices and examples from the ground, because this is exactly the work that has to happen at grassroots level. It's those practitioners that are doing the most important work. And we are here exactly talking at international EU level and quite far removed in some cases of what really happens on a day-to-day basis. And I suppose for me, the question is, in some regards, we're quite removed, but there's certain levers that may be little buttons that we can press to improve frameworks or other potential challenges for people that are on the ground. But equally, I think if we can use these spaces to share those best case practices with each other, then we can also facilitate that cross-border learning from each other.
Yeah.
So if anyone perhaps in this call as well has any examples of what they've done that they can share with the group. And I'm also, just to reflect on what you started with about collecting data and really knowing your community that you're embedded within and how important that is. If anyone else in this call maybe has experience with that and how they've tackled that, given maybe working within a framework that isn't necessarily always putting that style of working at the forefront.
Well, if I might just briefly add, of course, I know that in the Netherlands, especially in the theatre sector, there's a lot of data gathering going on, also on a collective branch kind of level. And I think that's data that should be made public to the sector as a whole, to enable also other cultural institutions to not only become aware of the necessity to collect and use data, but also to make use of the data that already have been collected. In Germany, I'm happen to be part of an initiative which was started in Berlin many years ago, the so-called Kulturmonitor. Stefan Gies may have heard about it. There you see a gradual sort of getting used to the idea that German cultural institutions start collecting data indeed on their audiences and on their non-participants. But this is a process which takes, in fact, years. And of course, Germany has the particularity that the privacy is a very high valued concept, which blocks many, I think, many initiatives to really go forward in collecting data on cultural behavior. So I think one suggestion would be to, at least on a political level, ask for more support for the cultural sector to be able to start collecting these data, because they also ask for a lot of in fact money or investments to set up databases, etc., and to maintain them.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, I completely agree with both of you, Liane and Willem, what you said, but I think, and this is reinforced a little bit what you said at the end, Willem, that the main challenge in what you are talking about is that the mindsets traditionally of the institutions, if I can call them like that, and the people we are talking about, we want to access, are completely different. So sending an invitation from an institution does not necessarily mean that there's anyone who's expecting to be invited or is reading an invitation. And the other way around, there might be people we have in mind when trying to address that don't consider what they are deemed to be cultural activities at all. So I think what I would be very interested on the basis of what you were talking about is about good practice, how to break down this kind of class wall between the traditional institutional thinking and the needs of really people down on the ground.
Well, I think one approach would be, and this is of course in the German context very hazardous to say, if there would be a more an obligation from the subsidizers towards the cultural sector to go out of their cultural ivory towers and go into the neighborhoods and into the precarious neighborhoods, for instance, and start talking to people, start exchanging views and ideas, to come to what you have just described as a different notion of culture. I think this would already be a very simple first move to make. But that would mean that a cultural institution will have to include such an aim in their own policy, in their own vision kind of statement, because otherwise it will only be window dressing while the traditional cultural production still continues. So we're talking about a paradigmatic shift, if I may say so, where you have, especially from a German point of view, you really have to say to the intendant, to the artistic director, that his or her view on the cultural production or on society will not be no longer leading or the most important.
Thank you. I see some raised hands, so I might quickly see Alessandra was first, but I wanted to check, Lars, did you have a direct response, or Alessandra as well?
Yeah, but I have a feeling that Alessandra may also have a direct response.
Okay, I'll start with Alessandra and then Lars.
Okay. Yes, I've got it, because I've been, let's say, thinking about this and working around these topics for about 20 years. And what I realized is that even where data and audience data, so data-driven decision making, was quite strong, culturally strong, because it was strong in terms of competences and policies, like, for example, in the UK. This wasn't enough, so this didn't change of anything, let's say, the patterns of cultural participation. And so the shift between marketing and audience development was one thing, but I think that cultural democracy is a little step further. So it's not just about, is precisely what emerges in terms of policy paradigm from the acknowledgement of the failure of the previous paradigms that were falling more under the democratization of culture understanding. So basically, you can refine your tools and toolboxes as much as you want. But in the end, if the attitude is me teaching you, or me getting to you, poor guy, or including with that approach to make you appreciate my art, what I defined as art, we end up in the same thing. So there are plenty of amazing practices. But what I think that is more needed, and of course they shall all need, as you were mentioning, on need to rely on data as well, definitely, because this is one set of the competence. But as Stefan was mentioning, this is not enough at all. It's a completely shift in the mindset of defining what's the kind of relationship you want to have with the people and communities around you. It's not about how to reach you and count you and segmenting you and targeting you, because this, of course, is part of the thing, but it already failed. So even in those countries where this was quite advanced in terms of policies, funding, and practices, basically, if you look into participation patterns, it failed. So I think there is something more, or at least as I see it, something a little bit more radical into that, which is in those practices, which is still problematic to see in institutional terms. So in more established institutions or so, it has to be negotiated and understood what's the shape that this concept could take within more established institutions. But there's a lot we can learn from more independent cultural organizations that are already, let's say, more focused to this approach somehow, because otherwise we end up with with concepts that we already overcame because they were insufficient, basically because they didn't work. So we understood it over time. This is my 2 cents.
Well, that makes a lot of sense as well. Lars, curious to hear what you think.
Yeah, no, I completely agree what has been said so far. I find it fascinating how this evolves, and I just want to add that if we look at the numerous examples of where where institutions successfully or unsuccessfully, but fascinatingly experiment with cultural democracy or with different forms of creating culture and also governing their institutions and co-authoring the provision and not only opening up the program for a more diverse audience. Then we see that I don't know. You mentioned the Kai Theater, but I'm thinking of a lot of members of Culture Action Europe, PEL in Portugal, Communitism in Athens, and endless forms where you can see that if there is a mindset, as Alessandra called it, a different mindset within an organization that is already democratic or collective or cooperative, then the top-down approach. So I agree, we need a bottom-up approach, but at the same time, the preconditions top-down also need to be set. And for me, the funding structures are a key point. And maybe I would twist a little bit what Willem brought in to say, maybe there needs to be a conditionality for institutions to look more towards the communities in which they're embedded. I'm always a little bit careful about conditionalities because our sector is already so precarious, and I would maybe rather see the perspective in a less distrust oriented approach, in a more trust-based approach. Because I think what we see is that the successful models are working with a lot of time, with big time frames, because it's about trust, about letting loose power, stepping aside, making space for others to step in, which isn't just a decision and an act to do, but it's a very long-term, with many small steps approach. And for that, the project-based funding models with timeframes of 2, 3, 4, maximum 5 years, and the current indicators just don't work. We need a really much more longitudinal and trust-based approach to encourage those organizations that want it and can do it to do it. And I don't believe that all of them need to do it, but those who are in that mindset already would need to get the space and the trust. And I don't know how that emanates, but I think the distrust at the moment and the project-based funding is one of the main problems.
Yeah.
Horacio.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Stefan and Liane for facilitating this webinar today. And I just wanted to build up a little bit. I feel like Alessandra and Lars already touched upon many of the things that I wanted to comment on. And also, I have two good practices, so we can populate our green area in the shared space. But the first one has to do with that mind shift that Alessandra was mentioning. I mean, I think that if the departing point is to open an institution that is designed to be closed, in a way that then I think that you are not realizing that it's all about the power redistribution. I mean, I think that, and this is the big question, is that we need to be able and to be ready to surrender some of the power, or at least to redistribute it. And I mean, the cases that we have here in Spain, I'm speaking from Madrid and from a network of community-based agents and centers. I mean, what we see is precisely what Lars was pointing at, that it is a matter of trust, and it is a matter of also of building interlocutors over time. And I think that this is something that is so underrated. Like you build a relationship within a neighborhood, as you said, and then the person leaves, or like you need a wider community that is able to become that interlocutor with the institution. The other one that I wanted to mention is the material aspect. Again, those of you who know me know very well, participation has a cost. It has a huge cost. So with relation to what you were saying, Lars, I think that the funding schemes also sort of free up the time of a view of a few, people who are able to then participate and to then be part of the process, the cultural, the democratic process that we're talking about. And then the other thing is that we don't have a culture and we don't have a practice of managing things together, doing things together. And in that sense, I think, and that's my last point, I think that, in addition to research, to data, in addition to what you were saying, the nature of the funding schemes, I think that collaboration with intermediaries and with institutions that have a totally different logic, governance and economic logic, it's fundamental. So we can also, exchange the values and dynamics and logics that operate within institutions. So I think that this idea of collaborating with intermediaries, it's also crucial when we talk about cultural democracy. To finish, the two best practice or good practices, let's say good practices that I'm bringing are the Reina Sofia Museum here in Madrid, who put together, who has been for many years now what they call the situated museum, and it has been building relationship with the neighbors. And literally, as Lars was saying, it's not about reprogramming or anything. It's about letting them take over the Reina Sofia, which you can imagine symbolically what that means. And the neighborhood where the Reina Sofia is actually the one that used to be the more ethnically diverse and who had many issues of different cultures living together. Now it's undergoing a lot of gentrification. But anyway, that's my good practice. And the other one is La Friche Belle de Mai, which is in Marseille and in southern France. And I think that you also have to realize that, as Alessandra was saying, the same way that there are policies that haven't worked in the past and strategies that haven't worked in the past, even with a new mindset, even with a new set of participants and power games in place, we are facing new challenges. We are facing new problems that we are totally unaware of when we are doing it the way that we think it could work. So I think that also looking at places that are really daring to give up power, we should really be encouraging and looking at them, because I think that they're very, very inspiring. And La Friche Belle de Mai, I think it's a Belle de Mai. It's a wonderful example. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Maybe first of all, I have to say thanks a lot for all of you for feeding in our whiteboard. Keep going. There's still already a lot of very valuable input and best practices. So I just wanted to mention that, I completely agree that both of you, Lars and Rosia, you mentioned the lacking trust, the talk about reallocation of funding. But I just coming back to what we start our discussion. We are talking now how to empower, so to say, institutions to get out of their traditional habits, so to say, in order to reach out really to a broader audience. I think the commitment to be open to diverse needs and cultural understandings of people with diverse needs, this is not the problem. Because now today you find it in the statement of any opera house, museum, or whatever, that they want to be more open. The next challenge after making a commitment is how to do it in concrete terms. And we're talking about that. And I'm very happy that we have diverse, so to say, issues already identified. But then there is very often from the side of these institutions a very particular argument, which is a little bit touching upon the tension between our plea or their plea for quality and excellence in the arts, on the one hand, and the diversity and or promoting diversity and inclusion on the other hand. So I think I often realize that even if there are people who are very willing to do something, there might be coming the point where they say, okay, then we lose our understanding of quality and excellence. And that's why we were founded. That's why we are there. So I think in addition to all what had been said, maybe how to tackle that point, that would be my question, so to say. But maybe Gilles, you have
Thanks for this conversation. Just very few remarks. I sensed in the comments before some kind of a fear to lose power. It should also be considered that reinforcing democracy in the, let's say, cultural and creative sector will be a source of strength for the sector, in particular vis-à-vis the funders. So finding ways to make any action, any project more inclusive, more participatory, will be also a source of strength. So some, let's say, some power holder may feel that they lose, but at the end of the day, the project, the organizations may win. Another point is that this sort of debate on democratizing is a debate that the other sectors, particularly, let's say, the civic sector, has been having also for a very long time with the crisis of representation of democratic institutions. It so happens that recently the reflection has advanced a lot, and techniques for participation have developed a lot in other sectors. I'm not thinking only in terms of gadgets and civic techs and so forth and so on, but there are lots of techniques now to improve participation. And I'm not sure that they've been taken up so widely in the culture and creative world. A third point is slamming an open door, but I don't think that the word has been uttered here. The importance of mediators, in the sense like for democracy as a whole, and for which civic education is important, the importance of mediation institutions cannot be overstated and will continue to be key. So in the democratization of the cultural and creative sector, there needs to be some kind of element, and that's a precondition for cultural democracy to function. Let's say it cannot totally develop on thin air in it by itself. So I think these are issues that are connected to democratic issues as a whole, and much more than, I think, profiling the audience in a given location and data management. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this. For mentioning that there are models, so to say, in particular in the civic sector. I think it's a good hint. Yeah. Are there more contributions? No raised hands at the moment, as I can see. Leander.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, just to build on what Gilles maybe was mentioning just before. And taking a look at the whiteboard as well. I can't see who's writing what, so all these comments on the whiteboard are anonymous to me. But on the topic of letting go of power, someone's written in opportunities, decolonization as cultural democracy. I was wondering if whoever wrote that would be up for maybe saying a little bit more about that. So I don't know who I'm putting on the spot here. So.
That was me, Sophie Hope. Hello. Hi. I guess I just am aware of how white and middle class some of these debates are, and I am also aware of the term decolonization is also co-opted and kind of lost its fangs over the years. But it's more of a sort of question I have, I suppose, about how these movements and challenges to dominant systems can kind of coalesce and relate to each other in terms of perhaps sort of radical rethinking of whose voices are heard and what sort of systems and notions of democracy we're talking about, and how decisions are made, who institutions are created by often in quite colonial forms, and how they're rethought in a decolonial way, as in a way perhaps that also movements for cultural democracy are also thinking about. So yeah, to sort of bring those thoughts and concepts and methods of action together. Haven't got any like major answers to that, but I'm just interested in seeing what we can do on that front.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's definitely quite a lot of overlap also in thinking about if one of the challenges that was mentioned before about funding structures that maybe perpetuate a specific way of specific approaches that hinder the decolonization movement. So I think possibly a topic for Culture Action Europe to explore further in during Beyond and Beyond. Lars, you had a hand raised before, but you've lowered it.
No, before you looked at the post-its, which I found a much better idea than me reacting, but maybe because I found it super interesting what was just said about decolonization. So maybe I do react quickly and try to bridge to what Gilles also had said, because I found that also really important to bring in the notion of participation, which is certainly somehow at the basis of thinking about cultural democracy as such. And there, I guess in the cultural sector, we've been looking at a million models for many years. From, I don't know, Arnstein's ladder of participation is maybe one of the baselines where we look at how we can increase somehow the participation of the audience, which is, so to speak, from a touch screen activity all the way across the spectrum to the end where we give away power and the authorship completely. And of course, we had Claire Bishop's nightmare of participation. We problematized it heavily. But what this whole notion of participation says, or why it is so important, is probably that it leads us to the fact to question our institutions that are, yes, colonial. And I like the maybe a little bit sloppy term, but still the term that Porto Santo Charter uses, the idea of exstitutionalization. You know, if we kind of, in a way, maybe decolonize our institutions and not so much open them up for more, to be many, but the other way around, to leave them and go out there and leave space for others to take. It's a much more radical approach, and is on the very end of Arnstein's ladder of participation, where we really let loose the dominant singular authorship that we are handling so far. Just wanted to kind of link these two dots, Gilles' contribution and the one of decolonization.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Lars. I think the idea is we are talking about, in fact, about institutions, how to open up institutions, and I would not even say that the institutions are outdated, but maybe they are, maybe not. But in any case, I think it seems not to be super helpful to think how to keep an institution which all this and bring in more people or other people and other needs, because that automatically means the institutions are a symbol or how to say, an incarnation of the power we are afraid to lose. All the institutions are afraid to lose. I think that's clear, and I like your idea, and I like the term of the execution in terms of let's step outside in order to see what we can do on a, so to say, on a white table, how to rebuild things, or how to rebuild structures in order to address the needs of a very diverse and maybe different audience. So we are getting closer to the end, and I would just say, I mean, we can pick up. There are so many. Really, thanks once more. Very interesting and helpful posts on the whiteboard. But there is also an opportunity now to ask maybe a last question So feel free to do so. Raise your hand. So if there's no, I don't know, it's a bit,
Maybe if there's no burning questions at the minute, I think maybe good to mention that this board unfortunately will close as soon as this Zoom ends. So if there's any final thoughts that you haven't really been able to go into, please enter them now. And maybe Stefan, if you agree, or unless you've maybe read something that captures your attention, but otherwise I thought maybe we hand to Lars quickly to maybe start closing and see how this moves forward to beyond, and maybe the next iteration, and how this work and the discussion we've just had can move forwards in the future work of Culture Action Europe.
Yeah. Thanks, Liane, and thanks, Stefan, for facilitating this and preparing this session so properly, and for everyone attending and listening and contributing. This is not the last in the series. We will have indeed 2 more. The next webinar will happen on the 15th of April, again from 4 to 5 p.m. Central European Time. That will be on the theme of culture and sustainability. Then there is a last one online on May 13th on the intrinsic value of culture. And then we will already meet in Torino in a live setting from the 4th to the 7th of June. And there the conference will completely focus on themes of cultural democracy, also how we can be many, how the power of being many can be transformative in our cultural institutions, and how through that our cultural institutions can be transformative for society. That all happens with a sense of urgency dictated, so to speak, not only by the situation in the world at the moment, but really also by a very positive and proactive belief of ours that with a stronger and more democratic role for culture, we can make the difference in society. So if you want to discuss with us with more time on spot in dedicated sessions, please make sure you get a spot in Torino. Until then, I will be happy to see you all online in this series. And with that, I wish you a nice afternoon.
So there was a very interesting last question.
That was me, if I may.
Yeah, I think we are over now, but we recorded it. No. We have it on the list. Now I think now we are out. Thanks a lot.
Okay.